So this is the interface, right? It comes up with this is called Lightbox. It's where all your projects are, brushes, tools, alphas, whatever. I can click and drag, and there's a whole bunch more that are over here. I'm just going to turn that off. This is where most of the magic happens. It's off to that right side. So on that right side, you have your tools. Now, everything you do, everything you build inside here is a tool. So if I were to model a person inside of ZBrush, they're not a model, they're just a tool. ZBrush started off as a 2D drawing program. So you could draw stuff, but one of the things that was advantageous of it is that you could actually draw depth. So if I use the regular tool and I just click and drag, you can kind of see how it looks like there's actual depth to this, where it looks like there is some layering going on. That's what ZBrush started off as. And then they gradually changed this into more of a 3D thing. Now, if I click on a 3D object like the cylinder and I click and drag, you can see how that cylinder is not just like on top of the stuff, it's actually intertwined with it. Now, if I click and drag another one, you can see how that one is and this one is. So I'm actually painting this cylinder using depth. Okay, it's just like there's depth there.
So those aren't actually in 3D?
Correct. They're not actually 3D. It's basically a 3D object that's flattened on the page right now. Same thing with this poly mesh. Here's a star. Whee. Something there. And depending on the angle that I hit it, you can see that the star comes out looking different. Okay. There's also a bunch of other stuff inside here too that work in very similar fashion. All right. So I'm going to clear my document. Color, clear. There we go. Okay. Now, if I want to actually create something that is 3D, I go to one of the 3D objects. Yep. I click and drag it, so there's nothing different than what I just did a second ago, except I'm going to go one step further and I'm going to go into edit mode. So you see on the top where it says draw and that's highlighted right here, that's drawing, so I'm drawing right now. If I go to edit mode, which is that button, now this is a 3D item. So if you look at, there's a white line that just went across the top and the bottom. See how that goes away and comes back? So that's showing me that I'm in 3D and I'm not in 3D. So throughout this whole thing, you could go into 3D and come out of 3D. Typically, once you're in, you kind of stay in, but that's what it is. So now that this is 3D, if I click and drag off of this, I can spin around it. Okay? If I control right click, I can zoom in and out. If I control left click, nope. If I alt left click, there we go, I can pan. Okay? So the controls are a little bit different than Maya. We just have to get used to it. Okay? So left click and drag off of it to spin around. Control right click to zoom in and out. Alt right click to pan. Okay? And I think you can also use, right click to drag around too. All right. So now this is a 3D object. So I want to sculpt on this thing. I want to deform it and shape it out. So if I go over here, this is my brush. Right now it's a standard brush. So if I click and drag, it's just going to pull stuff out or push stuff in depending on my setting. However, on this one, it's going to give me an error. Okay? This object is 3D, but the mesh is not a 3D mesh yet. So up here on the top right, I'm going to make this a poly mesh. Okay? So now it's a polygon. Now I can click and drag. And you can see how I can sculpt right on top of this, and it's actually pulling out that information. Now I'm going to give you a little bit of homework if you want this. I have my own copies. Find a good hotkey list. Okay? Print one up that you like. I'm going to give you all the hotkeys that I use, but if you wanted to get the ones that are that may just increase your workflow a little bit more, then definitely do that. So one of the ones I always use is S. S is for size. So anytime we want to edit the size of the brush, all we do is tap S, and then we can click and drag to change the size of our brush. Okay, and this goes up to 1,000. And then we could drag some more, Okay. Another one would be U. U is the intensity of that brush. Okay. So if we go to U, we can click and drag the intensity. If I click and drag across the surface and it's like pulling it up crazy amounts, I hit U, drag that number down, and it'll only pull it up little bits of amounts. See, right now I'm sculpting, but there's barely any movement on it just because it's so subtle. Hit U again, and then crank that up. Way too much. Okay, now all of these are up here too. Like here is my draw size, that's the S. Here is the Z intensity, that's U. If you look at the far right of that little pop-up that happened, there's the hotkey. Okay, so keep that in mind that as you're working, you can look at the hotkeys right there and get used to using the hotkeys. If you have to constantly go up here or there or anywhere else to get your stuff, it's going to take you forever to do. Now over here on the right, you see it says active points 482, total points 482. Right now there's 482 points on my cylinder, okay? If I wanted to create something like scales on the cylinder, I need a lot more divisions to happen, okay? So I need to add more divisions to this. So I hit Control D. Control D adds more divisions. So now, if you look, it says I have about 2,000 divisions. And if I shrink my brush down, I can add a little bit more refinement into that area, okay? If I add this brush like really tiny like this, and I try to do anything, there's not enough points there. I'm not even hitting a point. There's nothing happening right inside here, so I can't physically add detail to that area. Yes, sir?
Does Control D decrease by that set amount, or is it a percentage thing?
It multiplies it times 4, okay? So if you have a square, it's not going to just cut it in half, it cuts it in 4s, okay? So that's what it does over the entire thing. So every time you hit Control D, multiply it times 4, and that's what you're going to get. So this is 2,000-ish, Control D, now we're at 8,000-ish, right? 2 times 4 is 8. Now we have more detail. Now I could go in here and add more detail to this item. It's way too much Z intensity.
So it's the same thing with sculpting in Maya where it only cuts the points?
Correct. Okay. Now the neat thing about this compared to Maya's is that in Maya we have kind of like a limit. Like if you smooth something out too much, Maya freaks out and usually crashes. ZBrush is really good for not crashing. I'm not going to say it never crashes, but it's very rare, maybe once a day as opposed to once an hour for Maya, okay? So Control D, Control D, Control D. Look how many divisions I have now. You can't really see it too good, but it says 507,906. Control D again, 2 million. Control D again, 8 million. Okay, I probably wouldn't go higher than 8 million. It's going to go really slow. Now look at how smooth I can add something into this, and look at how small of detail I can add into this. Okay, so the more divisions you have in there, the more detail you can put into that. All right, so now let's say that at some point I'm like, cool, I added a little squiggly, but now what I want to do is pull that entire surface out. That whole thing is maybe a little bit too flat or something. So this is the way that we're not going to want to do it. I'll grab this and just brush over it. And you'll see how it's kind of like blobby and kind of slow, and it's kind of streaking some stuff. What I can do, one of the other advantages of this, is that I have 8 million points, but I can see all the way back to where we only had like 400 points, and I can edit it along the way. So Control D adds divisions. Control D adds divisions all the way up. Shift D lets me see the previous one. Okay? Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, Shift D, Shift D. So now I'm at 400 divisions. So now if I go in here and I tweak something like this, there we go. I'm tweaking the overall shape. Now I want to get back to where I have 8 million divisions. I don't hit Control D because the divisions are already there. Okay, we already have 8 million divisions. I just want to get back to that level. So now we just hit D. Okay, and every time we hit D, it just adds it, adds it, adds it. And you'll see that when you get to 8 million, our little squiggle guy is still there. It's still thinking. I told him you weren't going to crash. There we go. Okay, so that's another great thing is that we can work at this really low resolution to kind of frame things out. We can work at this high resolution to add a lot of detail, and we can jump back and forth between them. All right. Usually what happens is, let's say you're drawing a character out and you're like, geez, the shoulders are just like saggy or something, and I need to just pull them up, even them out, give them some volume, whatever. You go to the lower resolution, bulk it up, and then that carries into the higher resolutions, okay? Now, all of our brushes, this is just the standard brush for adding detail to this. If I go over here, I can go to any one of these brushes, and you can see there's a whole lot of brushes that are inside here. I use like 5 brushes. That's my main thing, is like these 5 brushes that I constantly use over and over and over again. Number 1 is clay buildup. Clay buildup is, imagine this is an actual like 3D pottery clay thing like in real life. What they do is they start off with a hunk of clay, and then as they need more detail or they need more volume, they grab a chunk of clay and they smack it on there, and then they smush it in, and then they add more detail to it. So that's what clay buildup does, is I click and drag, and it looks like I'm just adding clay right to this. Okay? Now you're saying to yourself, this is nuts, that looks horrible. It does look horrible. But when you use it with a tablet, you vary the pressure. So it doesn't look horrible. So it looks a little bit softer. So it looks a little bit more transition. Also, we wouldn't leave it, I typically don't sculpt with clay buildup at 8 million divisions. That's like way too many divisions. So let me hit Shift D a couple times, and I'll spin around to the other side. Okay, now I've added a bunch of stuff. Doesn't look a whole lot better, but here's why I do it at a lower resolution. My other brush that I use is smooth. So I sculpt something in like clay buildup, and then I want to smooth some of the stuff out. So instead of going up here and choosing smooth, I can just hold down Shift, and that is always your other brush. So you kind of like, you have an alternative brush. So I hold down Shift, now I'm in smooth. You can see it says smooth right there. And then I can click and drag and blend that in. Okay, I can add some detail, hold Shift, blend that in. Blend it in. Blend it in. Okay, so I can continuously do that kind of thing. So clay buildup, I use smooth. Some of these I'll use like randomly. Like crumple I've used before just to kind of like, oh, I just want to make this kind of look distressed. Like I'm doing a tree, garbage, whatever. And you can see it just adds this really nice level of detail on top of something. Okay. Some of these you have to play with. Sometimes I'll use flatten something out. I also use, it's hard to find these in here, the move tool, this one. Okay, so the move tool is great because it allows you to just move chunks. So I'm going to make this big. Now I just pull this over here, pull this over here, pull it over there, pull it over here. Okay, so I'm just grabbing stuff and just moving it around. Okay, so the move brush I use a lot also, especially when I'm trying to frame something out. I'm like, ooh, I don't like the position of the eye. It maybe needs to be moved over. I just grab the move tool and just move the eye over. Okay. What else? Noise. Polish I'll use too. This is good for just kind of like crisping up some of your stuff. You could also hit these hotkeys up here. So let me exit this so you can see it. So B is your hotkey for the brushes, pulls up all the brushes, and then if you know what the tool starts with, like the move tool starts with M, it'll isolate all the M's. And then there's a hotkey on the top left. So the hotkey for the move tool I just used is V. So a lot of times I'll just go B, M, V, and that gets me to the move tool, and then I can move stuff around. Or if I'm using clay buildup, B, C, B, and now I'm on the clay buildup tool. Okay, so very quickly you can kind of jump around to that. One of the other tools I'll use is this one called the Dam Standard, or Damien Standard. The guy who made it is Damien. And what it allows you to do is do these little cut lines in it. So I'm going to shrink this down. I'm just going to go add another level of division here. Oops, wrong way.
Is it the opposite of the first one you used?
No. This one is going to create more of like a crease. So if I'm doing something like a little crease right here, I would use this tool to use it. The other one is more of like a soft blobby push that it does. And you'll get comfortable using these things as you like play with them as to what works where. Like that one looks pretty good like that. Okay. Now the other thing that every one of these tools will do is we have shift, right? Shift will switch whatever tool we're in to smooth tool. Whoops, I don't want sticky keys on. Alt does the opposite. Okay, so right now the damn standard is pushing into the surface. If I hold Alt and drag, you can see how it pulls out of the surface. So again, if I'm trying to create a little valley or ridge or whatever, I can use that tool to do it. And I can switch to smooth, kind of smooth that out. Okay. So, and then I'll use a standard brush also. That's the other one I use. And I believe that's all the ones I'm pretty much going to use. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So those are your basic brushes. Now we also have over here this thing that says dots. That's the kind of brush that you're using. Okay. So imagine Photoshop. You have the ability to go into your brushes and choose like spacing. Choose the kind of brush that it is. That's what this does. So I can do a drag rectangle. As an example, let's say I went to my standard brush, I went to my alpha and I chose dragon scales there. And I started clicking and dragging. These dragon scales don't look very good because I'm basically like smearing those dragon scales over the entire thing. However, if I change this from dots to drag rectangle, I can basically just like drag the shape of that, and then drag another shape, and then drag another shape, and then drag another shape. So this is controlling how that brush is coming out. So as we start to play with stuff, we'll get more into what those specific things do. Change it back to dots. These alphas are basically what the shape that you want to deform. This was the default, so we're getting this kind of like round shape. But I could change it to any one of these, like that one. And you can see the kind of detail that I can add to this. Now the real power of all of those types of things is when you start venturing outside the package, when you start looking at things you can get for the tools. So Pixelogic, they make ZBrush. This is where you could download your trial if you needed to. They make all these extra patterns and textures and whatever else that you could use. So if you were like, oh, I want to put human skin on there, I can go to the skins area, and one of these, it's loading. Nope, that's dragon skin. It's also dragon skin. One of these is human skin. Oh, way down here. I forget which one skin is. But let's say I needed a vein. There we go. So now I have a vein that I could use, and I could, instead of trying to sculpt what a vein would look like, I could just use that drag tool and just put a vein right inside someone's head. So this is where you can add a lot of detail to your stuff. And just so you can see how easy it is to drag this stuff in there, I just downloaded it. I'm going to import. I think I went to my downloads. I may have to extract it real quick. Downloads. Yep. There we go. So now I have this vein texture that I can just use as a drag rectangle. And I go like this. And now I have a vein right there. And it's a 3D vein. It's not like a flat vein. It's actually a 3D vein. It's using the white values and the black values to create that depth to it.
Still just a PSD file, so you can just go in Photoshop and create something and throw it in there?
Yep. And that's how all these are created. They went into Photoshop with a picture, they outlined a vein, and then they just colored it or adjusted the coloring so that it would stand out more. Now there's people, ZBrush brush collection. Their job, their moneymaker, is that they sell brushes. Okay, so they just go and grab textures of bricks and whatever else, and they just make brushes. And they sell them for like pretty cheap, like $10, $5, $5 here. So they're not terribly expensive, but when you add in how many people are buying these things, in order for you not to have to go out there and make your own rock or rubble or stone textures, it's a lifesaver. Not really, but close enough. He makes all these cool ones too. There's one, these knuckles, nipples, and pores. Cracks, different kinds of cracks that are in sidewalk. Dragon, shaving ones. Blankets. Fabrics, different textures. Okay, all these different things, and you can just download them and put them into ZBrush, and you can use it just to help save time on the stuff that you be modeling otherwise. Okay, so don't be afraid to go out there and kind of play with some of those things. Look for other brushes that are out there, or create your own brush. All right. All right. So that's the nitty-gritty of how ZBrush works. Now over here on the right, there we go. This is where we created our initial tool. Let's just pretend that I click T, which is the hotkey for the edit mode, and we get out of edit mode, and I click and drag, you can see how I'm just creating basically that shape, that exact shape that I just did, right on top of all the other stuff. If I go back to edit mode and I try to spin around, it's hard to see, but I'm spinning around this one. Okay, the last one that I drew, I'm spinning around. The rest of it, ZBrush assumes, is like on my canvas. So I go to color, I go to clear, those are gone, and now this is back to where he was. So even me, I've used ZBrush for 2 years. I do it all the time. You accidentally hit T, you drag, no big deal, you go to color and you clear it, and then you draw your shape and get back in edit mode. Okay, even if I went like this out of edit mode, I could say clear, draw my shape back in, go back to edit mode, and now I'm good. Okay, it'll happen to you regardless. You just have to know those couple buttons to hit. Over here on the right are your subtools. Okay, so imagine you had a character and they had eyes and they had teeth and they had hair and they had all this other random stuff. You wouldn't want to keep all of your stuff on one layer. They have subtools. Each subtool is essentially a layer. That's how you can think of it. So if I wanted to add something to this, so I'd append, let's say, a cone, you'll see that I get another layer on here. And as I'm on this cone layer, let me turn the eyeball off of that. There he is. I could go through and start to sculpt on this cone layer without affecting that other layer. Okay? And it's a great way to separate all your stuff, make sure it's all nice and organized and whatever else. There's usually 7,000 little menus here. Everywhere it says split, merge, remesh, project, extract, those are all menus. Under geometry, more menus. Under array mesh, more menus. There's like menus all over the place, and there's even more menus way up here. You don't use nearly, I don't know, 1/10 of them. You only use like certain ones, okay? So let's go into the actual, like, we're building a character, where do we start phase. So what we want to do is I'm going to start off with a Z-sphere, okay? Now this works a little bit different than, let me brighten my interface a little bit. There we go. Nope, I'm going to have to go into my document, background, there we go. It's a horrible color, but I guess it'll do for so we can see. So a Z-sphere is essentially like a bone or a joint, okay? So you lay out these joints, and then you can tell ZBrush to make the character around these joints, okay? So just as an example, here is this. I'm going to click and drag, and then I'm going to move this up. Now to move it, I can just go to this move tool and drag that up, okay? Now, just so you see what happens, if I hit A, that's the toggle for previewing. There's what it would look like if I went through and actually made it a piece of geometry. Okay? So I'm going to go back to my draw mode, which is there. Click and drag. Go back to the move tool, which is W, handy. I'm just using Q to switch to draw, and then W to go to the move tool, and then I can use A to see what it's going to look like. All right, so that's what this is going to look like, and it gives me the ability to tweak things however I need to. So I can switch back to this. I can click on this joint, move that where I need to. Grab this one, move that one. Grab this one, move that one. Okay, or I can go to scale and scale this down. Okay.
Keep the scale.
The same one as my E.
What?
E. Right up here. So I would just go to scale E or R for rotate.
And where are you clicking on? Because I tried ZBrush yesterday and I couldn't scale.
Right here on the joint, it's tricky. Like left and right isn't doing anything. I have to go up and down. Okay. Actually, down is up. It's weird. It's part of this is like horrible. I don't know why they did that, but yeah. All right. So now I can spin around this thing. I can tweak it. I can do whatever. So let me start again. So I'm going to click my Z sphere. I'm back to where we were at the beginning of this, and I'm going to go to transform here, and I'm going to activate symmetry. If we're building a character, we want it to be symmetrical. I want to, whatever I do to the right side should happen to the left side to a point. Eventually we'll break off, do different things to each side, but for now, to get the basic shape, I'm going to do that. Now as I come in here, I had to spin around a little bit. You can see how I have two dots on this. So I like to draw this kind of like this is the pelvis. Okay, so this is like the center of the hips. So we're going to draw legs down, and we're going to draw the structure coming up. Now looking at a muscle structure, or a skeleton structure. You can, but they're not great. A lot. I mean, they're there. They're under texture, image plane down here, but they're not very good. I avoid them if I can. So looking at this, if this is our pelvis area, off to the left and right, those are where your hips are at. Okay, so that's where you're pivoting from. So that's where I want to put my first joint. So I'm going to zoom in a smidge. I'm going to draw this out. Switch to the move tool and just kind of pull it out. Okay, something like that. I'm going to make it bigger. There we go, so that should be good. And then I'm going to switch back to my draw tool, and I'm just going to draw another joint right here. Switch to my move tool, and I'm just going to move this down. Okay. Now you'll see that the this went with it. Because my move brush, how big my brush is bigger than that area, it's going to move the other one. So I'm going to shrink it down. And now that shouldn't move the other one. Okay. Pull that in a bit. Go back to my draw tool. Draw another one. Back to my move tool. And the idea here is to make it look like your character actually has some weight, especially if they're standing there. I wouldn't want to put these feet like way out here. That doesn't make sense. They would fall over. Or even here, that doesn't make sense. So they should be kind of like back here, kind of centered along this line. And see, I can always go back and kind of tweak where these are at. If I hit A, I can see what that's looking like. So if I said, oh, the thighs are a little bit too small, I need those to be a little bit bigger, switch to scale. Oops. Scale that up. Maybe I'll make these bigger. Maybe I'll make the pelvis bigger. There we go. And I'll draw the feet in there. And if you hold down shift as you're spinning around, it'll actually snap to like the side views, which is definitely helpful. Okay, so this is giving you a placeholder. It's not giving you the actual end geometry. It's giving you a placeholder for this. I could also grab this and rotate. And grab that and rotate. Or not. Doesn't want me to rotate. There we go. Okay. So then once I have that done, then I can go to my draw tool again and then start to draw in the spine. Now I have to be pretty close to that center point, otherwise what's going to happen is I'm going to draw two spines coming up the side. Watch how I go here. I'm drawing 2 spines, right? So I gotta make sure I'm pretty close to the center, and it knows to draw that. So with this, what I do is I set my bottom and I set my top. Instead of trying to draw out each spine right now, I'm just drawing the top and the bottom. Now obviously this is going to be a pretty thin character at the moment, but it'll get thicker as we get closer in. Then I'm just going to draw in some shoulders. And see how this is where we stopped? So I'm going to come off to the right. And maybe come back a little bit more. There we go. And the shoulders should definitely be bigger, so let's make those bigger. That could be a bit bigger too. Okay. Now one thing I want to do as I model this is I don't want to get too close. If the hands are near the side here, it's going to be very difficult to get into these crevices to paint. So I want to kind of put them out at an angle, that way I have plenty of room to get in here and start tweaking things. Okay? So I'm going to draw this in there, pull this down. I can see that this is probably a little bit too big, so I can just kind of shrink these up. Bend in there. And then this is where I could add in a hand and fingers and all that. I have an extra sphere here. I do. If I have an extra sphere, I click on it with the draw tool, or with the move tool. There it is. I switch to my draw tool and I alt, click on it, and it goes away. There we go. Okay. Remember, alt is the opposite. So if one adds, then the other one would take away. There's my fingers. Let's go and draw. Now what I'm doing here is I'm adding in an extra joint right at the base. That way I can go through and just scale that in. Now you can see, definitely not a perfect hand, but it's giving us, again, just the shape of it. There we go, and then we'll pull the thumb out. Now you could also draw like the hand. I could also draw that separately and then just attach it later too. As you get into these smaller areas, it's definitely a bit trickier to grab the stuff you want to grab. There we go. And you can see we're getting this weird transparency just because of where the things are kind of floating away or overlapping. There we go. And I just need to push this one down like that. So that's good. So then I could come in here with my draw tool and just kind of go, there's the middle joint, there's that joint. And again, just kind of giving shape to this. And as I'm doing this one side, remember it's doing the other side too, so I don't have to worry about having to redo this for the other side.
If you were to forget to turn on the symmetry, is there something like copy paste sets of spheres?
You can mirror it later if we needed to, but we wouldn't be able to mirror the Z spheres. Okay, we only be able to mirror the geometry over. All right, so that looks all right. I could tweak it definitely more, maybe adding another division down here, and then scaling this up. Good. There we go. Now I'm not worried about that too much because that'll blend in later. I just want to get a good base. All right, and then the same thing here. Let's go to this and add a little bit there. And you should really treat this as a pose where you're looking at just kind of the gesture of where the person's at. If it's an alien, they may not be standing up like this. You may have them hunched over still. That's perfectly fine. You can still hunch them over. Just try not to scrunch them up into a ball. Okay.
So say you got the person pose, it's like a straight up T pose,
Right.
Could you just move them around later without having to distort it? Like just have
You have to sort of distort it later. So you have to. The good thing about doing this and then going into that, as long as the shapes aren't drastically different, like you don't start off here on this guy and then you end up here on your finished product. This is still close to the other one. You can use this to move the other one around some. Not perfectly, but to a point.
I mean, like, can you lock length, I guess? So, like, okay, I want it to stay this length. I kind of want to rotate it so, okay, so the arm's maybe up here or something.
Yes, you can definitely do that.
Yeah, that's what
Yep.
I'm talking about.
Yeah.
So you can, yeah, you know what I'm saying.
Yep. All right. So here's my guy. Okay. A little bit more character to him. Let's go and grab this. I'm just going to rotate this. I want to rotate this down some.
Oh, so is that how you do it then? Like that?
Yeah.
Can you use it like handles though?
No.
No,
No.
An old man.
Yeah, I was just like a creepy dude. Oops. Control is the button you hold control and it'll drag stuff further down the chain. There we go.
Well, alright, so you hold control, and what does that do? It just moves.
It moves more than just the one. Like if I don't hold control, oops. Come on. If I just click on this and move it, it does that. If I hold control and move it, it moves the whole thing.
And like, it just stays proportionate too, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, it stays proportionate to what it's doing.
That is what I was really trying to say.
Yes.
How to do that.
Yeah. So control. I mean, it still like allows me to tweak where some of the stuff is, but for the most part, it's good. Okay. So there's my guy. I think his feet need to be adjusted a little bit more. Looks like he's going to fall over. So rotate. Oops. Back in Maya.
So once you get like the spheres and stuff in, it's a little easier to like play and
Oh yeah, yeah. This is just getting that initial setup of where everything's going to be. Imagine trying to create a full-blown character from scratch inside of Maya. It'd be very difficult to get to this level as quick as we've done it. I've seen people who, you know, they're in ZBrush every single day, 40 hours a week, and they can just zip these things out. You know, they're just like popping these things really quick. That's good there. Okay, so once I have this and I have my basic shape, I'll of course save it. Okay, so I hit Control S, and what it does is it saves everything. It saves this guy that I'm working on, yep. And then it saves anything I've done over here. So this little weird shape that I have over there will also save that, okay? So I'm gonna go down to the bottom here where it says Adaptive Skin. And every time I hit A, that's what it was turning on, this Adaptive Skin preview, okay? So now what I wanna do is say, actually, like, let's do this thing. So make Adaptive Skin. Now I hit it, and it doesn't look like anything happened. But if I scroll back up, you'll see that I have a new subtool or new tool over here, and that's my guy. And if I hit A, it's not going to do anything. Okay, because now this is basically like a baked-in version of my character.
So the Z-sphere model stays its own separate tool?
Yep, the Z-sphere stays a separate tool, and it's great because then if I'm like, ooh, I'm really not feeling the way this is happening, excuse me, I can always jump back to the Z-sphere, tweak it, remake the adaptive skin, and go from there. Okay, your workflow in this should be trying to work as quickly and as over the entire thing as you can, just so you can get a feel for what's happening inside it. And if you're not feeling a certain spot, jump back to the beginning, start the guy, not from the very beginning, but from the Z-sphere stage, see if you can tweak it and fix it from there. Okay. So like in here, I know like these hips, they definitely look weird, right? So I'm going to add some divisions to this. It has 6,700 divisions. I'm going to hit Control D. I just do it one time, and then I'm going to add some clay buildup. Oops. And I want to activate symmetry back on. There we go. And so now I'm just adding some geometry into the mix here. Maybe take the Z intensity down some. Sure. I'm going to smooth it out a little bit. There we go. Smooth that part out a little bit. I'm going to switch to my move tool. And I'm just going to start to kind of block in some of the shapes. I'm not even worried about the hands right now. That's like a last thing. And see, I'm just adding in little bits of detail. That's it. Just trying to see how this is going to come out. I'll use my clay buildup tool. Add some knees in there. Thicken up the thighs a little bit.
So most of this is made a lot easier with the tablet.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. Especially if you're, I mean, you may have to spend an hour or 2 hours just getting used to the tablet, but it's definitely a lot easier because you're doing that. You want it harder, you press harder. You want it lighter, you press lighter.
You can get like the new bamboo ones and all that stuff for like $50 or something like that.
Yeah. And we have them here too. You guys can use those. You can't take them home. Alright, so you can see how I'm just kind of sculpting this. So your first part of this, what you should try to focus in on in the first part is getting to this stage. Getting to the point where, number one, you're kind of comfortable just kind of moving around ZBrush. Remember how long it took you to get comfortable with Maya, right? Get comfortable with ZBrush. Get comfortable moving stuff around. Get comfortable just using those Z spheres and blocking in your character. Then once you get to this stage, then we'll go further. Then we'll start to add in some of that bits of detail there. Like I said before, we're going to kind of go with like this lower resolution, and then we're going to zoom in like on the face here and the torso and start to shape out some of this stuff. Really add a lot of divisions and start to shape where the eyes are, where the mouth is, where the nose is, and the ears and everything. And just kind of really start forming it there, and then we'll start working our way down to start massing in the rest of this. Okay? But it helps to have a good overall gesture of what he looks like to get started. And as you're doing this, it definitely helps to kind of look at reference for all of these things. So looking at the skeleton definitely helps. spell. There we go. So something like this will give you an idea of what a knee looks like when it's bent, or what it looks like when it's straight, or what the shoulder coming into the chest muscle, what that looks like. You need to see these kinds of things, because otherwise you're not going to draw it correctly. And especially like we talked about when we're looking at muscle. Even looking at stuff like this, which is ZBrush stuff, gives you a good idea of how these things are flowing from one to the other. One of the biggest things I see is that people separate everything, right? The shoulder, it's a big ball, and then the bicep is another thing, and then the chest is another thing. No, these things like flow around and connect to each other in certain spots. That's what makes them work. Something like this is great because you can see it from literally every angle. There we go. So you can see what it looks like on the back. You can see what it looks like on the front. You can see how the shoulder blade turns into the shoulder blade turns into the shoulder, turns into the pec, and how this pit area is set up, and how this comes down and hinges like that. Okay, that's what's going to make your model look good, is if you have these bits of detail inside there. If you're just guessing, you're most of the time going to guess wrong. Okay, even the people who have done this for years and years and years, they have these references. They have one screen full of pictures of whatever it is they're trying to model. That way they know what it's supposed to look like. If you don't know what this is going to look like and you don't want to get reference on the internet, work out. Get some big muscles. Take pictures of yourself. Use those. Whichever you think is quicker.
45 days.
They have a 21-day fix. Even these kinds of things too. If you look at, they have anatomy books, and those anatomy books go through, here's what all of these muscles look like. Don't look at the medical ones. Those are horrible ones because they're like actually like gray muscle. You want to find ones that have like the red muscle like this, where it's easy to see all those different shapes. Something like that is great. And if you really have, if you got some extra cash, there's a website called fineart.sk, and they have reference. It's like everything. Like, I want to see what someone's eye looks like close up. A girl's eye in her mid-20s, kind of winking at me. Like, you can search to that level. So you can get some hobby licenses, 1 artist only, or professional licenses up to 20 artists. So they have lots of cool stuff, but it is a pay site, so you have to pay for that kind of stuff. Okay? So get comfortable with ZBrush a little bit. Get comfortable using some of these kinds of tools, getting the Z spheres and whatnot set up, and then we'll go from there.